Hello and welcome to another episode of Inner Work for Greater Good. My name is Emily Eldridge with Change Light. I'm so happy to have you here. As always, we are all about doing inner work that accelerates your power to be the best version of yourself that you can be, to shine your brightest light and have the biggest impact on the world, biggest, most positive impact on the world, whatever that is for you. So the question today is, can people fundamentally change? This was a conversation my husband and I had yesterday as we were driving the 5-hour drive from Vermont to New York after a long weekend for Memorial Day. And we just finished watching this last weekend, the Succession finale. So if you haven't seen Succession, oh my God, it's an amazing show. It's so brilliantly done. It's awesome. Highly, highly recommend it. It's really an extraordinary study in narcissism, narcissistic family dynamics. I mean, everybody sees something different, but my God, it's so clearly like narcissism and narcissistic families and the dynamics within, but also played out, in this like billionaire media, Rupert Murdoch type character and family. So anyway, really, really fascinating. Highly recommend. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but the point is, my husband and I were listening to a podcast about the final episode, and some of these podcasts we listen to are fantastic. They actually interview the directors and the writers and some of the actors and some of the others who are involved. But one of the things that one of the directors said, the director, his name's Mark Mylod, the director of the final episode, and he's directed a bunch of the previous episodes, is he said that he thinks that Jesse Armstrong, who's the writer of the show and the showrunner, the guy who started it, that he doesn't think people can fundamentally change. The people just are who they are. And so immediately my husband was like, he was driving, so he's like, pause the podcast, right? So I paused it, and he goes, I don't know about that. Like, can people really change? Can they fundamentally change? And he said, I think they can. And I said, yes, and I think it's a matter of what do you mean by fundamentally and change? So are we talking, someone's constitution, like the nervous system they were born with, their sort of innate gifts or talents, just basically like how the person was originally designed before the world like affected them. And then what do you also mean by change? And so are we talking changing the person's constitution, or that person's behaviors can change? Or that, and so I sort of gave this hypothetical of like, okay, imagine if you have, let's say there's somebody who bullied you in high school, and, you could ask, can that person fundamentally change? And I would say, well, actually, to be honest with you, I would say it depends, because if that person's bullying from a place of like they're being abused and then they're taking that out on other people, but that as they get older and have experiences, become more self-aware, they stop bullying, then you could say that bully changed. They're not bullying anymore. So in that case, it's a matter of behaviors, right? Can people's behaviors change? Yes, I mean, they can. Can people's emotional states change? Yes, they can. Can people's actual, though, constitutions change? And and that's a good question. And I think that our constitutions, at least in my experience, and this is where we get into like nature versus nurture, right? When I say constitution, it's like someone's nature. Actually, let me before I get into my sort of attitudes on it, then you even think about what is someone's nature, right? And so, for example, there's always the story about, the scorpion that stings the frog's back. You may have heard this before. I won't bother recounting it. But, the scorpion's reasoning is just, well, I'm a scorpion. That's what I do. And so it kind of begs the question of like, the people around us or even ourselves, like, well, that's just who I am. That's just what I do. As though it's some kind of immutable aspect of us and we just can't change it. And I think that, versus nurture, of course, versus the impacts, the things that have impacted us and how they've impacted us, the traumas we've had, the sort of, family, family of origin experiences we've had, the, just different things that have basically shaped us or molded us, maybe some of the positive feedback we've gotten for certain behaviors, can that change us? And then can we unchange that, if you will? And so the question was with these characters, are they can they fundamentally change, or are they fundamentally broken? Like, is that it? And the characters, the main ones they were talking about were the children of the narcissistic patriarch. And, could they possibly change? And so the point is that my attitude was that I think that and I speak from some experience here, I think that our constitutions are sort of the way we were uniquely designed, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily change that much. Like the core of who we are and sort of who we came into this world as. And the reason why I say that, and I'm not an expert in this, but like if my mother were here, she could tell you all the different types of like babies there are, and that there are certain babies that just come into this world like just have more anxious nervous systems, and then there's some that are more sort of chill and like go with the flow. Phlegmatic, that was the word I was trying to remember. I was telling my husband yesterday, I was like, and there's these certain babies and I forgot the word for them. And I said, it's going to come to me. Sure enough, it just came to me. Like babies that are more phlegmatic, they're more just kind of like chill, go with the flow. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but you have different types of basically nervous systems, let's say. And then we also do have certain types of brain wiring, or, there can also be ways that brains have been impacted even in the womb. And then there's things like, psychopathy and sociopathy. My understanding of that is psychopaths are born, sociopaths are made. So they're both pretty much defined in terms of a lack of empathy, but that there are some that they're just born. Some people are just born into this world that way. And I've met people who are actually really great people. I'm thinking one guy in particular who straight up said, he goes, I think I'm a psychopath. But he's a really great guy, and he's not masking it. He's like a dad, he's got kids, and he's a really good guy, and he's generous with his time, and he's a very successful businessman. But he told me, he goes, oh, age like 11 or 12, I was very aware that I was born different, and just the way other people functioned and how they felt about things was very different from how I did. And he goes, and he made, no, I'm sorry, take that back. He realized that years before, but at the age of 11 or 12, he made the choice. And he said, I know that I could use this, the way I'm designed, the way I'm built. He said, I could use it for bad. I could definitely hurt people. But he made a conscious choice not to. He decided he was not going to hurt people, but instead try to help people. So, but the point is, his fundamental nature didn't change, but the choices he made, given his awareness of how he was designed, impacted and has impacted how he's shown up in the world, the choices he makes, his behaviors, how he treats other people. So that's like psychopathy. And then sociopathy, though, tends to be that, someone who's, let's say, had a lot of trauma, or maybe they were overly coddled as children. And so their the sort of childlike narcissism was fed in them, and they weren't, not proper boundaries set up. There are all kinds of reasons why, like, like sociopathy can exist. Sorry, I switched that. I said narcissism. I should say more about sociopathy. The point is, sociopathy can exist within someone, usually because of some kind of trauma or something that just caused them to basically have this kind of lack of empathy and like a psychopathy about them. But in other words, they weren't born into this world like that. Things happened to them that changed something in them or caused them to make certain conscious or unconscious choices to then not care about other people and then make choices that were purely selfish. And there are some arguments that say that certain brain wirings can actually lend themselves more to that than others, that not everybody who goes through the same experiences will necessarily become a sociopath. Anyway, it's a long way of saying that there are different schools of thought and different approaches to this question of like fundamental and, whether or not that can change. And so I think that here's what I think. I personally think that we have our own unique design that we were born with. And we have our own unique truth that we are here to live. And the way we were designed is meant to serve us living that truth. And I also believe that it doesn't make sense to go against your own divine design. What do I mean by that? the way I was designed is I am like deeply empathic. I am emotional. I'm a creative type personality. I have a certain like rhythm that I go with. That's my own inner rhythm. It's not necessarily the way everybody else, runs, operates in their lives. And so I find that I function better and I show up better when I honor my true nature. And I see it in other people as well. There's a piece that happens when you operate from your own nature. I personally don't think someone's nature is to hurt other people. I could be wrong about that. I think there could be other reasons for that. But the point is, I think that when we operate according to our own nature, we operate from a place of deeper peace and self-acceptance. We show up better in the world. We can have a more positive impact as opposed to trying to be someone or something we are not. I think it's better to go with our own nature. And so that's that whole fundament. Can people fundamentally change? So I don't think that changes that much personally. However, I do think that we can change and undo and heal from some of the influences that we've had that may have distorted those aspects of ourselves, that may have caused, like, for example, I'm a very emotionally sensitive person. Well, I could have had certain experiences that made me like manipulate people with my emotionality or something, or that caused me to just decide that there was no point in, living my life and making different, and I could have made different choices, or I could have like sort of fallen into certain traps. My point is though, that what can change is we can undo some of the influences, some of the things that have happened to us. We can undo some of the traumas, the impact of those traumas, the emotional, distortions that we have inside. That darkness that we carry can be brought back to light so that it's in alignment with our nature, with our truth, with our light, so that we can show up the best way possible. So that's all by way of saying, I think that there are absolutely that people can change depending on what it is you're trying to change or they're trying to change. And so if this question intrigues you because it's for you, then I would say, look at what is true for you and feels most right for you and feels most in alignment with your truth, and that it serves the presence you're here to be and the impact that you're here to have, that helps you shine your brightest light, and own that and honor it and live in alignment, in accordance, in harmony with that truth within you and with your nature, so far as it helps you shine your light brighter. And if there are behaviors, if you treat people a certain way that's disrespectful or mean, if you show up in certain ways, if you carry certain wounds and traumas, anything that doesn't feel like it brings you peace, or that it's not in alignment with who you are, or that it's the result of like how you were treated, let's say negatively, then I do think that can change. And we can heal those parts. Now that's for yourself. The question, but if the question is this for someone else? Is it that you want someone else to change? And that's, because if the question is, well, can people fundamentally change? And you're thinking about someone in your life, well, can they fundamentally change? It's possible, I think, that they can change. Maybe they have psychopathic tendencies, but they can choose to be different. They can choose to use those tendencies in a different way. I actually read something, I don't know what's popping in my head, but I read something that said that John the Baptist, who was one of the founders, I guess, of the Christian church, that was it John the Baptist? God, see, or St. Paul. Don't take my word for it, but there was apparently a big figure in Christianity where he actually would have been considered a psychopath, but then he made a different choice and chose to basically use his sort of innate, the way he was designed, for good and to make a positive difference. And so the point is, we can change that. We can change what we do with our own fundamental nature. And so what that can look like to someone on the outside is, oh, that person's really changed. Oh, they're so much happier, they're so much more at peace, or, oh, they're so much brighter, oh, they're so much more empowered. oh, they're actually, trying to, instead of, I don't, again, it's popping in my head. Like I have friends who I grew up with where, they're actors. And so they were actors in high school. Now they're lawyers. And it's like they're using their acting skills in the courtroom. I mean, we can change how those fundamental aspects of us show up. So it may look to others like we've changed, or we may heal from wounds. And it may look to others like we've changed. And we've changed in that we've changed how we choose to show up. Those parts of us have been healed and transformed back to light, etc. But I would say that in that case, we're shining more of our actual light. It's like the bully who was bullying because of how they were being treated in their own home, but then they heal those wounds and they show up as kinder people, and maybe actually the same tendencies that cause them to bully and be like a leader of the pack, maybe now they're actually leading their own business and they're really respectful because they've been able to use those tendencies for good. They've healed the wounds and use those tendencies for good. But what does it take when it comes to to ourselves and someone else? It takes self-awareness. First and foremost, self-awareness. You've got to recognize that there's something within you that needs to change, or, that's not serving you, or that's not an accurate depiction of who you are, or causes you pain. So self-awareness, or that what you're doing is causing other people pain. That's a huge part of it. Having that level of self-awareness. And also I would say empathy too, because I think it requires empathy, or, well, let's just say that empathy is really helpful in recognizing when our behaviors are hurting other people and in choosing to change that. So it requires being aware. It requires the willingness and the desire to actually change, to actually heal those wounds or whatever's required. And the reason why I say that is because I know someone personally who was in therapy with one of their siblings at one point, and this sibling was very toxic. And he straight up said to the person, to his sibling, he said, well, I'm an asshole. So what? People can just put up with it. So there's self-awareness. He was aware that he acted like an asshole, but he didn't care, not interested in changing, and basically just expected everyone around him to just put up with it. You see? So that's why it requires a willingness and a desire. And then it really requires hard inner work. We've got to do the work. So the reason why I want to say those three things also is because when we're thinking about other people in our lives, and it's so easy, like I've been this way too, it's like where I desperately want someone to change, that can be a real trap of we want that person to change. And because they're not changing, or because we're trying so hard to change them, it negatively impacts us. And so I just want to point out that other person, yes, do they have the capacity to change? Yes. Maybe they do. They probably do. But do they have the self-awareness, willingness, or desire? And do they have the tools, or are they going to do the hard work to actually change, to really change how they show up in the world? That's a whole other level. So in that case, sadly, some people around us don't change. They don't, because it requires them to do that. And we can't make them do it. I think I have a whole other episode all about that. So anyway, just in case you're curious, those are my thoughts about whether or not people can fundamentally change. That's what I think. And if you have other thoughts, please feel free to share them with me, Emily@changelight.world. Come into our wonderful community where we've got a free course, and it's a free community. And, let's talk about this, maybe post about it, and, see where we go. All right. So I hope you're well. Thank you so much. I totally appreciate you. And I will see you next week. Bye.